Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is what if during replication things don't go perfect? Okay, our goal is to replicate our DNA perfectly every single time. And for the most part, we do that. We don't have, for the trillions and trillions of replications that we've had, we do have mutations in our body, but most of the time we do replicate it perfectly. Right? However, there is some times that it doesn't go perfectly, and that can result in some diseases and disabilities. So let's go through. So DNA is being replicated over and over again every time you make a new cell. So your DNA code and which is basically your order of your bases. So everybody has a slightly different order. Now, most of the time, when we say that we are 99.9% the same as chimps, what that means is that if you looked at a chimp's order of his bases or her bases, and then compared them to the order of your bases, 99.9% of the bases would be the exact same order. Okay, it's a very, very small percentage. That's the difference between them. So it's even between people, it's even less. So, our bases are almost exactly the same. It's just a very few bases that are out of order that makes us slightly different. Okay. So your DNA code or your order of your bases must be copied perfectly from letter to letter. So the trillions and trillions of times that it has been replicated leads to errors in replications or what's known as a mutation. Now, all of us have thousands of mutations in our body. Now, you've made a number of replication errors throughout your body, okay? But it usually doesn't result in anything. Either the cell will die from its replication error, so you replicate, you made a major DNA error, and then that cell just kills itself, so it never continues on. Or it's in an area that doesn't really affect you at all. Maybe it makes a protein that's not essential, or maybe it only slightly modifies the protein and you don't notice it. Okay. Other times you do notice it, but it's just cosmetic. So like gray hair. Okay, when I talked about, I don't know if you were paying attention during the break, but I've had mutations in my scalp cells, which basically they've lost the ability to produce color pigment. So that's why where I used to have dark hair, but now I'm starting to go gray and eventually white because my hair cells are mutating, and they're rapidly mutating over and over again. More and more of them are replicating those mutated cells, so eventually I'll lose all ability to grow pigment in my hair. Okay, balding is another example. Okay, people who are going bald, that means that there's a mutation, and now it doesn't know how to grow the proper instructions how to grow hair anymore. So those cells just stop growing it. Okay, it's caused by a mutation. Moles. If anybody has moles on their body, okay, those are all skin cells that have mutated and are now have the wrong instructions for the color pigmentation for your skin. So, if you are a pale person and you have a dark mole, basically those skin cells got the wrong instructions to make really pale skin, and now they're making dark skin. Okay, so we have a bunch of mutations throughout our body, but they're not all detrimental. Okay, some of them have no effect, or I guess you could think of them as a positive effect if you like having moles or gray hair for some reason. Okay, however, sometimes the error occurs in a crucial area, a crucial coding area for something that, a really important set of instructions. Like we have a set of instructions for our eye color, but it's not essential to survival. But we also have a set of instructions on how to breathe or how to pump our heart, and those are crucial set of instructions. So sometimes the errors are in a crucial coding area of the double helix, and then they can have some pretty serious effects. So if the mutation or error occurs in a crucial area, and what we call crucial errors, these are genes. So what genes are like the specific set of instructions. So we have a gene for hair color, we have a gene for eye color, we have a gene for temperament, we have a gene for how to grow leg bones, we have a gene for how to grow hair. Okay, so if the error occurs in like a crucial gene on the double helix, that specific cell, whatever the error occurs in, will lose instructions for a vital function. So the example that we're going to go through today is going to be the example for what about the instructions to when to duplicate and when not to. So if you lose instructions on when to replicate, okay, what are the problems there? So genes are areas of the DNA for when a cell should divide. So the areas in DNA that code for when to divide are called oncogenes. Okay, they're genes, but they've got a special name. They're called oncogenes, and they basically tell a cell when you should divide and when shouldn't you. Now, if you get a mutation in one of these oncogenes, okay, the cell now has incorrect instructions on when to divide. It doesn't now know when to divide and then when to just actually do its job. And then it starts dividing usually uncontrollably. Now, when it divides, it's going to give all its new cells the same wrong mutated set of instructions as it has. So its children are also going to replicate really, really rapidly. Okay? And they're going to have the wrong instructions for replication. And then they're going to have babies that have the wrong instructions for replication. And this continues on. If you look over at my figure on the right-hand side here, okay? First of all, this is what I mean by a gene. So here's our double helix all the way down here. Okay? And when I'm talking about a gene, I'm talking about a specific area of the helix, like this area right here. So the series of letters that's right here might code for, eye color. It also might code for when your cells divide. Okay? So that's what a gene is. It's just basically an area on the DNA. Okay? Now, this is what happens when you have a mutation. Okay? So over here we got normal cells. Then what happens is one of them gets an error in it. Okay? Well, that error, when that cell replicates, it's going to create 2 more cells with the error. Okay? And then those cells are going to go on to replicate to make more cells, and then more cells, and then a whole bunch more cells. Now, the reason why the ones that don't have the error, so if we go back here, and you see these 2 cells right here, okay? Remember that they don't have the wrong set of instructions, so they basically stopped replicating. Okay? They said, well, I have the proper set of instructions, and this proper set of instructions says stop replicating. So I stop replicating, but the ones with the wrong set of instructions just keep replicating and replicating and replicating, and they keep getting more and more numbers because they're just passing that same set of instructions on. And before you know it, you have this mass, what we call a tumor. Okay? So this is what is causing cancer. Okay? It's basically a mutation in the oncogenes, which controls cell division. And because you now have the wrong set of instructions, you replicate uncontrollably. Okay? So cancer is just a mutation or error in the code that controls cell division, known as an oncogene. So that's why if you study cancer, it's known as oncology. So there's classes that you can take in school if you decide to go into science called oncology. I took a number of them. And then if you want to specialize in it, say you become a medical doctor and then you want to specialize in just cancer patients, you're called an oncologist. Okay? And the name basically comes from the fact of where those genes are, okay, for cancer, and they're oncogenes. Okay, so what is a mutation? So what are they? Well, basically, it's just a switching of the letter. Okay, so letters can be switched when we replicate, and when they get switched, they can do it for a number of reasons. So here's our original sequence right here. Okay, so we have a T, A, C, G, C, A, T, G, G, A, A, A. Okay, that's our original sequence. Well, what happens if accidentally a C gets popped out and a T goes in there? Okay, so now we have basically one base sequence that's off. So now this base sequence is off, and it's not going to give the proper protein. Okay, that's one way that you could have a mutation. It's basically the letters just get substituted out. Okay? Now that's not usually a huge deal because you're basically only off by one letter. This is where it becomes huge deals, is insertion and deletions. Okay, and what I mean by that is when you do a substitution like over here, and I just basically kick out one base sequence and put the rest in. Look how much is still exactly the same. Okay? This whole area is still correct, and this area before that is still correct. We basically just have one little localized area that's kind of screwed up right there, but everything else is still good. Okay? But when you do an insertion or deletion, and what I mean by an insertion is basically you don't kick anybody out, you actually just bring in a brand new base pair. So you add an extra base pair. That's why it's called an insertion. Okay, you're inserting an extra base pair, but I never removed anything. Well, now if you look, everything is screwed up. Okay, because you now basically have kicked all the bases down one, that everything is now altered. And this will become a little bit more clear when we do protein synthesis. Okay, a deletion, the same idea. Okay, if you delete a letter, now all of these letters are all off. Okay, from our original sequence. So these are the 3 different ways that we're going to talk about in class on how you get a mutation. Okay? What's basically happening is your DNA, when it replicated, it put in the wrong letters, or it deleted a letter set, and so on and so forth, and caused basically a mutation. Okay, so why did they happen? Hey, we obviously want to avoid that. I don't want to get cancer, so how do I avoid mutations? Well, there's 2 factors, okay? You may have heard of nature versus nurture, okay, or nature versus nature. But there's two ways that you can look at avoiding cancer or why it happens. There's genetic reasons, environmental reasons. So we'll talk about the genetic reasons first. So you don't actually inherit cancer from your parents. We do say that cancer is heritable, but it's only the predisposition for cancer, okay? You can't actually inherit cancer from your parents. What you do inherit, though, is the tendency or the resiliency, okay? So what I mean by that is you should know what tendency is and resiliency are, of replication errors, which leads to cancer. So each one of us is slightly different in our resiliency to develop cancer. Okay? Some of us really are for sure going to get cancer when they're older. Okay? No matter what, we just really have high replication errors in our family. Okay? Others of us are really resilient against it, and no matter what we do environmentally wise, will not get cancer. Okay? We have a genetic predisposition. So it's very much like some of us just inherit natural, athletic, musical, artistic, or say beauty ability. Some of us also inherit resistant to DNA replication errors. Some of us are resistant to cancer, okay, or resistant to making these replication errors. Some of us are the opposite and have the tendency to make these errors, just like how some of us are very non-athletic or non-musical or non-artistic. Okay? Some of us have resistance to DNA replication errors in our liver cells, where you have like no family history of liver cancer, but you may be prone to replication errors in, say, your breast tissue and have a history of breast cancer. So sometimes you're resilient to one type of cancer, but have the tendency to develop another type. So what you would really inherit and what you are going to pass on to your children is a predisposition on replication errors. Okay, is basically you do have a genetic profile of how resilient you are to them, or your tendency to make them, okay, as you replicate your DNA. There, you can think about this, but you really can't do anything about it. Now you can run 23andMe, and they'll actually tell you these kind of things. How resilient you are and what your tendencies are, but there's nothing you can change about that. They're kind of locked in there. Now, in grade 11, we did talk about breeding out certain genes where you can, I don't want to go back into designer babies, but as far as you're concerned, you're kind of stuck with your genetics. Now, what you can do, though, to control. Now, you can't control your genetic factors, okay? If we go back, is to limit your environmental impacts. So the environment you expose your body to can greatly increase or decrease your chance of replication errors. Okay? Regardless of whether you're resilient or you have the tendency, you want to limit the environmental impacts of developing replication errors. So certain aspects of the outside environment interfere with DNA replication and can increase our chances of a mutation. So these environmental impacts often target oncogenes more than the other genes, and they're known as carcinogens. So things like smoking, UV radiation, general radiation, okay, numerous different chemicals, charcoal, asbestos. What these environmental impacts do is they come into our body, and when they are inside our body, they get inside our cells, they get inside our nucleus, and they basically screw up our ability to replicate our DNA. So the picture I have over here on the left, okay, here's our normal DNA, okay, and as it's replicating, if UV radiation comes in, okay, it basically kind of starts warping the DNA. So now when it replicates, it doesn't replicate properly. And then you have an increased chance of having an error. Right? And that's why UV radiation, which comes from the sun, we need to ensure that we wear protection, like sunscreen, or wearing sunglasses that are UV protective. Because you're preventing those UV rays, called photons, from coming into your body and disrupting your DNA replication. And that's why UV radiation causes skin cancer, because your skin cells are the ones that are exposed to the sun, and as they're replicating, if sun's shining on them, it's zapping them and can screw up their replication. Okay, now in this lecture, we really kind of focused on mutations in DNA leading to cancer, okay? Just because cancer is such a huge deal, especially in our area and in our country. But there's numerous other genetic diseases that all result from a mutation. Okay? Any disease that develops post-birth, because sometimes you're born with a disease that your parents actually gave you. Okay, it wasn't through replication; it was just your parents gave you a faulty sperm, like Down syndrome, or a faulty egg, which also would Down syndrome. Okay, that wasn't a replication error. That was your parents giving you the error. But most other genetic diseases result from during replication. So once you became one cell into 2, into 4, into 8. So there's numerous other genetic diseases, but all genetic diseases post-conception are caused by replication errors. These diseases are incurable, okay, as the only cure would be to fix the code in every single cell by finding the error in their code and then correcting it with a proper basis. Okay? Other genetic diseases include like cystic fibrosis, Huntington's, sickle cell anemia, Parkinson's, dementia, multiple sclerosis. Now, all of us, this was shocking for me when I was going through school, all of us, if we live long enough, will develop some form of cancer. Okay? If we are able to survive long enough and we don't die from other things like dying from Alzheimer's or dying from old age or dying from a heart attack or dying from a stroke, okay? If we all live long enough, we all develop cancer. Because at a certain time over that many replications, chances are you're going to get a replication error in an oncogene and you're going to start creating a tumor and you're going to get cancer. So almost all males, if they live to 80, 85, die of prostate. They don't die of prostate cancer, but they have prostate cancer when they do autopsies on them. Okay? Now, if we go through our last kind of slide here, this was kind of a really interesting thing. So basically, we have 23 chromosomes. Well, this kind of list kind of shows you if you get an error in these chromosomes, it kind of tells you the genetic disability that you will have or genetic disease that you will have. So you can go through and see, muscle dystrophy, okay? Where breast cancer is. So if 5% of breast cancers come from a mutation on chromosome 17. Tay-Sachs, Alzheimer's, sickle cell anemia, melanoma with skin cancer, cystic fibrosis, Huntington's. Okay? It's kind of just an interesting thing to show you, different mutations on different areas cause different genetic disabilities because each chromosome codes for certain instructions. Okay? So, for instance, on number 17 here, if we look at it, okay, the fact that if you get an error there can cause breast cancer, it means that there must be some oncogenes on chromosome 17 for breast tissue. Okay. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.